Hi everyone, this is Jack from Maths Forge, and in today's lesson we're going to be doing quadratic graphs. So let's take a look at our first example. Here we're being asked to sketch the following quadratic equation, y is equal to x squared minus 14x plus 48. How do we sketch quadratic equations? Well, you need three things. You first need the roots. Now the roots are where the graph cuts the x-axis. So where the graph cuts the x-axis, you then need the y-intercept, and this is where the graph cuts the y-axis. The third thing you need is whether the quadratic graph is positive or negative. If it's positive, it has a U shape. If it is negative, it has a N shape. And how you know whether the graph is positive or negative is by checking the x squared term in your equation. So if the x squared term is positive, then it is a positive quadratic. So the first thing we've done is how to identify whether it's positive or negative. Check your x squared term. In our case here, it is positive, so we know that the graph is going to look like this. The next step is to check your y-intercept. So where does this graph cut the y-axis? And this can be found by your constant in the equation, so the number without any x next to it. So in our case, it's positive 48. So it cuts the y-axis at positive 48. The final thing we need to do is to find the roots. Now, how you find the roots for this graph is when you solve the equation when it's equal to x. So we're going to have x squared minus 14x plus 48. And where it's equal to y here, we're going to actually equal it to 0. We're then going to solve for x. Once we find those x values, they should be our roots. So how do we solve this? I can see that this quadratic equation can be factorized into two brackets. We're going to have an x and an x, and two numbers that multiply to give us 48 and add to give us negative 14. These two numbers are going to be negative 8 and negative 6. So now solving for this equation, we're going to have x minus 8 is equal to 0, and x minus 6 is also equal to 0. Therefore, x is equal to 8, and x is equal to 6. And these are our roots. So this quadratic equation, it is a positive quadratic equation, so it has a U shape. It cuts the y-axis at 48, and it cuts the x-axis at 8 and 6. So now let's just start labeling these off. So it's going to cut the x-axis at 8 and 6. It's going to be a U shape, and it's going to cut the y-axis at 48. So this is actually a weird looking graph. It's going to be really squishy. So it's going to look like this. And of course, it's going to shoot off vertically until it hits 48. And if we check our answer, there it is. As you can see, it's not identical to the actual answer. So that's what the actual answer looks like. But ours is not far off. And the idea of this is the sketching part. To sketch the graph, it doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but it does have to have the same characteristics, which in our case, it does. Now let's do a 2-star example. Here we're being asked to find the equation of the line in the form of y equals x squared plus bx plus c. So how do we go about doing this? Well, we need to see a couple of things first. We need to see the roots of this equation. So we need to see where this graph cuts the x-axis. I can see that one of the roots is at x equals negative 1, and the other root is at x equals negative 3. Now, just by using our roots, we can actually get the equation of this line. We don't need to do anything else, just using the roots. And this is how it's done. Get each of your roots to equal 0. And this is what I mean by that. I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And this is going to give us the following. X plus 1 is equal to 0. And for the second root, we're going to have to add 3 to both sides to get it equal to 0. So plus 3. And this is going to give us x plus 3 is equal to 0. So this is what I meant when I said get your root equal to 0. Your next step is to take the expression part of your root, so this x plus 1 and this x plus 3, put them into brackets and multiply them together. So we're going to have x plus 1 and x plus 3. Now if we multiply them out, we're going to have x squared and then plus 3x and then plus 1x, or just x, and then plus 3. Now if we simplify this, we're going to have x squared plus 3x plus x is plus 4x, and then plus 3. Now at this stage, you have to check to see if your quadratic is positive or negative. In our case, it is positive. So we can actually just leave it as it is since the x squared is positive. But this is it. This is your equation for your quadratic graph. So y is equal to x squared plus 4x plus 3. And you can actually check to see if you've done it correctly by checking your y-intercept. Here our y-intercept is plus 3. And if we check our graph, it is plus 3. So if we check our answer, there it is. The equation of this line is y is equal to x squared plus 4x plus 3. Now let's do a 3-star example. Again, we're being asked to find the equation of the line in the form of y equals x squared plus bx plus c. So as we did in the previous example, we're going to just look at our roots. So we can see here that the roots, or where the graph cuts the x-axis, can be found at x is equal to 0 and x is equal to -4. For our second step, we're going to get these roots to equal 0. Our first root is already equal to 0, so we don't need to do anything there. But our second root, we can add 4 to both sides to get it equal to 0. This is now going to give us the following. X plus 4 is equal to 0. Now we can take each expression, or in this case, the variable part of this root and the expression part of this root, put them into brackets and multiply them together. Since this is just an x on its own, we don't need to put it into brackets, but we can multiply to the x plus 4 in brackets. And now if we multiply this out, we'll get x squared plus 4x. And there's actually no y-intercept here, which means that the graph must be cutting the y-intercept at 0. And if we check it, there it is. It's actually cutting the y-axis at 0. So the next thing to do is to check whether the graph is positive or negative. In our case here, it is negative. So it cannot be a positive x squared. So how we actually solve this part of the problem is by multiplying our expression here by -1. This is now going to give us negative x squared, because -1 times x squared is negative x squared, and -4x, because of course -1 times 4x is -4x. Now this is the expression for a negative quadratic. So if we say y is equal to this, we now have a quadratic equation. And if we check our answer, there it is. The equation for this graph is y is equal to -x squared minus 4x. And that's it for our lesson on quadratic graphs.